renowned British pilot lies dying in the scorching Sahara, his aircraft's wreckage barely visible against endless dunes. For 8 agonizing days, he scratches desperate messages in his logbook, certain rescue will come. It never does. But this isn't just a tragic aviation disaster. It's the final chapter of a scandalous story involving forbidden romance, a suspicious death, and one of the most sensational murder trials of the 1930s. On April 11, 1933, British aviation pioneer Bill Lancaster took off in his Avro Avian aircraft with an ambitious goal: to shatter the world record for flying between London and Cape Town in southern Africa. The challenge was immense. Lancaster's Avian was significantly slower than competing aircraft of that era, meaning he would need to make extremely brief stops and survive on minimal sleep if he had any chance of claiming the record. After losing his way multiple times and going without sleep for 30 consecutive hours, already running 10 hours behind his planned schedule, Lancaster departed from Ragon in central Algeria on the evening of April 12th. His intention was to complete a nighttime crossing of 750 miles across the Sahara Desert. Disaster struck less than an hour into the flight when the Avian's engine failed, forcing him to make an emergency landing in the desert far north of his intended flight path. Though relatively uninjured and firing occasional flares, he waited for the rescue he believed would come. Search efforts were concentrated far to the south, and a ground search operation launched by vehicle from Ragon also proved unsuccessful. He perished 8 days later, on April 20th. His final message, scrawled on a fuel card, read, "So the beginning of the 8th day has dawned. Still cool. I have no water. I am waiting patiently. Please come soon. Fever overtook me last night. I hope you receive my complete logbook. It tells the story." He died precisely 1 year to the day after his friend was killed under questionable circumstances. This is the story of that love triangle murder. Bill Lancaster was born in Birmingham at the turn of the century and emigrated to Australia before World War I. In 1916, he first joined the Australian Army and subsequently the Australian Flying Corps. He remained in Britain after the war and enlisted in the Royal Air Force, marrying Annie Besant in 1919, with whom he had 2 children, and serving in India throughout the 1920s. He received promotion from pilot officer to flying officer in 1921. In 1927, he was transferred to the RAF Reserve and decided to make his name by flying from England to Australia. He was now separated from his wife, but found himself trapped both by family loyalty and his own intense religious beliefs from pursuing a divorce. He encountered Jessie Miller, who had just arrived in London seeking adventure and excitement, while her journalist husband, with whom she had an unhappy marriage, remained at home in Australia. Bill had recently left the RAF and was seeking fame and fortune, as he had a wife and children to provide for back home. Inspired by Charles Lindbergh's remarkable recent solo flight to Paris, Bill wanted to establish his own record by flying from England to Australia in a new lightweight aircraft called the Avro Avian. During a party while drinking, Bill told Jessie about his plan, and as she spoke about her own dreams of adventure, he invited her to join him. She became enthusiastic about the idea of flying to Australia and, in practical terms, created a business partnership with him. At that time, she had never flown in an aircraft in her entire life. Jessie's charm and powers of persuasion, along with her ability to raise funds and sponsorships in everything necessary to actually accomplish the flight, soon convinced a skeptical Bill to take her along. It was an astonishing plan that captured the nation's imagination, and on October 14, 1927, Bill and Jessie, after a farewell from Bill's wife, departed from Croydon Airport in London. They made this flight in an Avro Avian they named the Red Rose. At the time, it was one of the longest flights ever undertaken in such a small aircraft. It was the first flight between England and Australia undertaken by a female pilot. The intensity and danger of their experiences bonded the two closely, and 6 weeks into the journey, after yet another near-death experience, Bill and Jesse collapsed into each other's arms. Perhaps inevitably, they fell in love. The journey lasted 6 months, and when Bill and Jesse finally arrived in Australia, after establishing a new world record for distance traveled in a lightweight aircraft, they were greeted by adoring crowds. Jesse's remarkable achievements were even more noteworthy: the longest flight ever undertaken by a woman, the first woman to cross the equator in the air, and the first woman to fly more than 8,000 miles. An enormous crowd welcomed them upon arrival in Darwin, and during the subsequent tour of Australia, they became the golden couple of aviation and became lovers along the way, not just business partners. But the love between them remained a secret, and in the public's eyes, they remained faithful spouses to their partners at home. To capitalize on their newly acquired fame, Bill and Jesse sailed to Hollywood in June 1928 to star in a film. But the Great Depression arrived, funding failed to materialize, and they moved to New York to seek new opportunities. In 1929, Jesse became the third woman to obtain a pilot's license in New York, and at that time there were only 34 licensed female pilots in the United States. In 1930, she established a dual speed record for transcontinental flights across the United States. Despite their achievements, life proved difficult, and they ended up in Miami, where they decided the best chance they had of making money was for Jesse to write her autobiography. At that time, a female pilot was still a relative novelty, and Amelia Earhart had achieved great success with her own book about her exploits. His mother met Jesse at a social gathering and explained that her son was looking for work after losing his job at a magazine. He said he would be delighted to write a book about her life. He moved into the property rented by Bill and Jesse in Coral Gables, Florida, to help with the writing of the book. He and Jesse had developed a relationship in Bill's absence, and Clark convinced Jesse to leave Bill and marry him. It was quite an interesting situation. The two men shared a bedroom, while Jesse had her own room. Curiously, the men got along very well. Jesse, on the other hand, was becoming disappointed because Hayden never seemed to get around to actually typing her life and times. During this period, in 1932, Bill got involved in a new venture called Latin American Airways. It was operated by some individuals who wanted to use his services to transport illegal immigrants across the Mexican border, as well as marijuana. He refused and departed for St. Louis to raise more money for his own business, selling aircraft engines. In St. Louis, he received letters from both Hayden and Jesse. These confirmed rumors that instead of acting as friends, they were now lovers, and Jesse, now that they were both single, intended to marry. On the afternoon of April 19th, Bill returned to Miami and was greeted by the two lovers. Curiously, that night they resumed their previous sleeping arrangements, with the man in one room and Jesse in the other. She complied with Hayden's request to lock her bedroom door. In the early morning hours, she was awakened by knocking on the door, and Bill told her that Hayden had committed suicide with a gunshot and had also left 2 suicide letters. Hayden was still alive, and the separated couple had great difficulty finding a doctor or getting him transported to the hospital. The following day, he died. There were several quite intriguing aspects to this case. The weapon in question belonged to Bill, and it was known that Hayden had an aversion to firearms. Hayden, although resentful of Bill's presence, had obviously won Jesse over. But most serious was the presence of the suicide letters that police discovered while searching the house. Most of the text was typed, and the signatures were made in pencil. By all appearances, the typing was done by Bill. Furthermore, the signatures did not match Hayden's authentic signature. Jesse was soon ruled out, and the emphasis shifted entirely to Bill. Initially, he was charged with conspiring with the people behind Latin American Airways, but this charge was withdrawn as he was accused of the more serious crime of murder. If found guilty, he would face the electric chair. He contacted the prosecution and confessed to drafting the suicide letters, not Hayden. The situation looked grim for him as he shared the room with Hayden and lied about the suicide notes, owned the weapon in question, and had knowledge of the affair between Hayden and Jesse. There were bruises on the body indicating some kind of struggle before the murder, and no one had slept in his bed. But all was not lost. Bill's attorney, James Lathrop, arranged for Jesse to meet with Miami's best defense attorney, Jim Carson. In reality, he was something of a lawyer's lawyer, as he only accepted invitations to act from other attorneys, hence James Lathrop's connection. He agreed to the request, but was terribly skeptical about success, given the forged suicide notes and the fact that Bill was a foreigner. Jesse convinced him to see Bill, who convinced him of his innocence. Carson agreed to take the case under two conditions. Hayden's body must be exhumed and subjected to autopsy at the defense's request. The second was that, in Carson's words, Jesse would be on the witness stand and would have to reveal everything about her relationship with both men, something she agreed to do. And on August 2nd, 1932, the trial began. The defense was basing itself on one main issue. Hayden committed suicide because he was temperamental and unstable, drank heavily and smoked marijuana, and discussed suicide. Carson quickly debunked two rumors that had been widely circulated by the press. The paramedics who carried Hayden's body downstairs couldn't remember if he had hit something that could cause bruising. The second is that Bill's bed was disheveled, to quote a witness, so the police intervention photograph was useless. The trial began to fall apart for the prosecution when they presented two witnesses from Latin American Airways, currently facing charges of importing Chinese immigrants to the U.S. as well as marijuana for the growing San Francisco market. The evidence presented was rejected by the jury. Jesse had difficulty explaining her actions, but more importantly, the spectators in the courtroom crowd, who had previously behaved like an angry mob, began to applaud Bill as he presented his defense to the prosecution. At one point, the judge threatened to empty the courtroom due to their disorderly behavior. But Carson was about to sabotage the late Hayden Clark's reputation. While Hayden was courting Jesse, he was forced to admit he was cured of a venereal disease. She was forced to admit this on the witness stand, although she claimed she had no disease. Hayden was undoubtedly a womanizer and, moreover, had up to 3 other girlfriends. During his stay in Coral Grove, he had a bigamous relationship with Virginia Clark and a love affair with a certain Peggy Brown. But the testimony of some of his friends was devastating. Dick Lavender from New Orleans stated they were drinking companions and smoked marijuana, and that he stole money from Lavender's only source of income, the Veterans Department. Furthermore, his attitude toward the female sex was condemning, as he claimed not to care if he gave them a dose of syphilis or not. He mentioned that if he committed suicide, it would be with a precise shot to the head. Another friend, named Richardson, was writing a play about Rasputin and would visit Hayden in Coral Grove from time to time, where he observed that he was a habitual drinker and occasionally helped him financially. Suicide was mentioned again in their conversations. Carson made his master move. He needed an expert witness in ballistics and hired the services of renowned expert Dr. Albert Hamilton, the go-to person for this type of advice. He presented to the jury the charred skull of the late Hayden Clark, which clearly demonstrated an entry wound, declaring that there was only one conclusion and only one conclusion that could be reached, that the shot was self-inflicted at point-blank range with direct hand contact. At the instant the weapon was pressed against the head and the head was pressed against the weapon, adding that it was absolutely suicide. He stated there was not the slightest evidence supporting a murder theory. The Dade County Medical Commission also agreed with the manner of ending his life at that location. The prosecution could do little. Bill was released to thunderous applause from the spectators. The trial was extraordinary. Bill Lancaster went from being portrayed as a degenerate involved with immigrants and a drug smuggling scheme, wanting to return to Miami to kill Jesse's new lover, to a respectable war veteran and world-famous aviator who was prevented by divorce laws from marrying the woman he loved and was betrayed by his supposed friend Hayden Clark. No one had a good word to say about Clark, and not even his mother and brother testified on his behalf. Although Bill and Jessie had ended the romance and partnership, she spoke fondly in Lancaster's defense, and the trial judge made a summary in his favor. Bill was acquitted of the murder charge after 5 hours of deliberation. It is considered that although the evidence was dubious, a major factor in the acquittal was his calm, straightforward, and gentlemanly demeanor in court, and the portrayal of the victim as depressive, drug-addicted, and suicidal. Public opinion may also have influenced the jury. After the trial, Bill and Jessie agreed to leave the United States and go to Britain, with Bill leaving first. 2 months later, Jessie joined him, and to avoid the press, she was allowed to disembark before the ship docked. Bill went to live with his parents, while Jessie stayed with an elderly aunt before securing an apartment on Edgware Road. Their financial prospects were very different. Jessie managed to hire a ghostwriter for a series of articles, but she never had the opportunity to publish her memoirs. Bill, on the other hand, was having great difficulty finding work. There was a widespread feeling that his acquittal regarding Hayden Clark's death was due more to the strange world of American justice, quite different from good old English law. Furthermore, he hadn't piloted an aircraft in 12 months, 3 of which were spent in a Florida jail cell. His resume was not good at all. Amy Johnson had just broken his 6,300-mile flight record from London to South Africa in a time of 4 days, 6 hours, and 54 minutes. Bill decided the only way to rehabilitate himself as a pilot was to break that record and re-establish his reputation. He borrowed £700 from his father, bought an Avro Avian, and decided to emulate and beat the record. The big problem was that his aircraft was slower than the champion's, and he would have to make more frequent stops along the route. He made it to the French Sahara and disappeared. Despite a frantic rescue effort led by Jessie from London, no trace of him could be found. For more than 30 years he remained undetected until he was discovered by a French patrol on February 12, 1962, when they found the fuselage and his mummified corpse, and the story returned to the news when a patrol on a random journey through the Sahara came upon the wreckage of the aircraft with the pilot's skeleton visible beneath the wing. Attached to the wreckage and wrapped in a waterproof envelope was the pilot's logbook, which he had turned into a diary, recounting the 8 days he spent dying in the desert and expressing all his love for the woman he hoped to win back with this flight. A quick look at the logbook revealed the pilot's name, Bill Lancaster. Jessie remained in the UK and married in 1936. Shortly before the flight, Bill had made a will, making her the sole beneficiary.